on a dry, wind-burned morning in July of 1988. In Seward County, Nebraska, the soil had already given up. You could see it in the way the ground broke apart under a boot heel. Not crumbled, snapped, like pottery left too long in a kiln. Cornfields that should have been waist-high by then stood stunted. Leaves curled tight, as if they were trying to hide from the sun itself. The rain had stopped in May. It never came back. And on County Road 9, just past a leaning barbed wire fence and a mailbox with no flag, a 72-year-old woman named Margaret Halvorsen walked her rows like she had every summer since 1946. She didn't hurry, didn't panic, didn't even look surprised. Her hands, thin and lined, brushed the tops of the corn as she moved, like she was counting something only she could see. At the far end of the field, a pickup truck door slammed. Out stepped Daniel Reeves, 34, college-educated, new owner of Reeves AG Supply in nearby Utica. Clean boots, pressed shirt, a man who believed in yield charts and lab data, and hybrid seed catalogs printed in full color. He stood there for a moment, looking across her field. Then he shook his head. "Ma'am," he called out not unkindly, but not quietly either. "You're not going to pull 10 bushels an acre out of that." Margaret didn't turn around, didn't answer right away. She reached down, pinched a leaf, let it go. Then she said, "We'll see." Let me tell you about Margaret Halvorsen. She wasn't always alone out there. Back in April of 1952, her husband, Eric Halvorsen, bought that land for $18,400, 160 acres of mixed soil, some of it good loam, some of it stubborn clay. He worked it with a 1948 Farmall M, 40 horsepower on paper, but more like pure willpower in practice. That tractor didn't complain. Neither did Eric. They raised 3 children, buried 1. By 1979, Eric was gone too. Heart trouble. Quick, quiet, the way he lived. Margaret kept the farm. People said she'd sell. She didn't. People said she'd lease it out. She didn't. Instead, she planted the same corn her grandmother had planted back in Boone County, Iowa, in 1918. Open-pollinated. Save seed. No patent. No brand name. Daniel Reeves called it outdated. Most people did. By 1988, nearly every farmer in Seward County had switched to hybrid corn, high-yield varieties bred for uniformity, chemical response, and maximum output under ideal conditions. You planted it, fertilized it heavy, sprayed it right, and it paid you back when the weather cooperated. Margaret's corn didn't look like that. It stood uneven, some stalks taller, some shorter, leaves thicker, roots deeper, kernels smaller, messy, unimpressive, and according to Daniel, completely inefficient. That afternoon, he came back. This time, he didn't come alone. 2 other farmers stood with him at the edge of her field, men who had already written off the season, men who had invested tens of thousands in hybrid seed that was now burning up under a sky that refused to change. Daniel folded his arms. "You still planting that? What do you even call it?" Margaret walked toward them slowly. She wiped her hands on her jeans. "My grandmother's corn," she said. One of the men chuckled. Daniel didn't. He laughed. Out loud. Full. Confident. The kind of laugh that carries across a dry field and lands harder than words. "In this," he said, gesturing at the cracked earth, "you think that's going to outperform modern hybrids? In a drought." Margaret looked at him, not offended, not defensive, just steady. "It already has," she said. "That made it worse." The laughter spread, not cruel, but certain, because to them, this wasn't just wrong. It was impossible. And that's when Margaret turned, walked back toward her barn, and said something so quietly they almost didn't hear it. "You're measuring the wrong thing." They didn't follow her, didn't ask what she meant. But 3 weeks later, when the county agronomist started taking yield samples, Daniel Reeves found himself standing in Margaret Halvorsen's field again, staring at numbers he couldn't explain. By the second week of August 1988, Seward County didn't look like farmland anymore. It looked abandoned. Fields that had once promised 140 bushels per acre were now barely holding on to 20. Some didn't even justify the fuel it would take to harvest them. Leaves had gone from green to a brittle gray-green. curling tighter each day, the plants conserving what little moisture remained deep below the surface. Combines sat idle in machine sheds. There was no point in running them yet, and in some cases there might never be. Daniel Reeves had stopped making his usual sales rounds. There wasn't anything left to sell. Fertilizer couldn't fix this. Neither could herbicide. Not now, but the numbers kept coming in. Field reports, test plots, moisture readings. And one set of figures didn't match anything else. Margaret Halvorsen's land. He drove out again. Alone this time. The same gravel road. The same leaning fence. The same mailbox without a flag. But something had changed. Her corn was still standing. Not tall, not impressive, but alive in a way the others weren't. Leaves still open, stalk still holding tension. He stepped out of the truck slowly, like he was walking into a mistake he didn't understand. Margaret was near the edge of the field, checking ears. "You're getting reports too?" she asked without looking up. Daniel didn't answer that. He picked an ear himself, peeled it back. The kernels were smaller than hybrid corn, less uniform, but they were filled, tight, alive. "This doesn't make sense," he said. Margaret nodded. "It does," she replied. "You just weren't taught this version of it. Let me tell you about open-pollinated corn. Before hybrids took over American agriculture in the 1930s and 40s, nearly all corn was open-pollinated. Farmers saved seed from the best plants each year, selecting traits that mattered most to their land, not a laboratory. Over generations, those seeds adapted, not to perfect conditions, but to real ones: dry years, wet years, poor soil, strong wind. Hybrids changed that. They were bred for maximum yield under controlled inputs: fertilizer, irrigation, chemical support. And when everything aligned, they produced more, much more, but they lost something: flexibility. Margaret's corn wasn't built to win in a good year. It was built to survive a bad one. Daniel looked across her field again, then back at his notes. "You're averaging, what, 68 bushels?" he asked. "Closer to 72, she said. He swallowed. Most farms that year would be lucky to break 30. Have you ever known something was built for a different world than the one you were standing in? Because Daniel had built his entire business on the idea that progress only moved forward. And now he was staring at proof that sometimes it circles back. "I need to understand this," he said. Margaret finally looked at him directly. "You need to listen first," she replied. And for the first time since he'd stepped onto her land, Daniel Reeves didn't have anything to say. She led him toward the barn. Inside, under a layer of dust and memory, sat something he hadn't expected: a corn sheller, hand-cranked, steel frame, cast iron flywheel. Next to it, stacked neatly in wooden crates, were sacks of seed, each one labeled by year, and one older than all the rest. "My grandmother brought that with her," Margaret said, resting her hand on the sack. "From Iowa." Daniel stepped closer. "You've been planting from the same line this whole time?" Margaret nodded, selecting, saving, watching. He shook his head, slowly this time, not in disbelief, in recognition. "Everyone said this wouldn't work," he admitted. Margaret gave a small smile. "They always do." Outside, the wind picked up again. Hot, dry, relentless. But inside that barn, standing between a century of seed and a machine no one used anymore, Daniel Reeves realized something that didn't fit into any report he'd ever read. And it was the first time in his life that being wrong felt more important than being right. By late September of 1988, the combines finally came out, not because the crops were ready, but because there was nothing left to wait for. Across Seward County, Nebraska, fields that should roar with a steady rhythm of harvest instead produce a hollow, uneven sound, metal moving through plants that had never fully lived. Dust followed every machine like a second shadow. Yield monitors flickered numbers that farmers didn't want to look at. 23 bushels, 19, some even lower. Men who had taken loans against rejected harvests stood in their fields afterward, hats in hand, doing math that didn't work. And then there was Margaret Halvorsen's field. Daniel Reeves was there the morning she started. He stood near the edge again, But this time he didn't fold his arms, didn't speak first. He just watched. Margaret climbed into the seat of her combine, a 1972 John Deere 6600, about 105 horsepower, bought used in 1978 for $14,500 after Eric passed. It wasn't new, it wasn't polished, but it had been maintained the same way everything on that farm had been. Carefully, patiently, without shortcuts. The engine turned over slow, then steady, then alive. Let me tell you about that machine. The John Deere 6600 wasn't built for comfort. It was built for consistency. A naturally aspirated diesel engine, no electronics, no onboard computers, no yield mapping. Just gears, belts, and a man, or in this case a woman, who understood exactly how it behaved under pressure. It weighed around 12,500 pounds and moved to a field at a pace that didn't rush anything. Because rushing, Margaret believed, was how you miss what mattered. The header dropped. The first row went in. And the sound that came out of that machine was different, full, even, alive. Daniel stepped closer, almost without realizing it. Grain poured into the hopper. Not perfect, but real, strong. By the end of the first pass, he already knew what the numbers would say. But he waited anyway, because this time he wanted to see it happen. Row by row, pass by pass. Margaret worked without hurry. No wasted movement. No second-guessing. And as the hours went by, more trucks pulled up along the edge of the road. Farmers, neighbors, men who had laughed. They didn't laugh now. They stood in silence, watching a field that had no right to look like this in a year like this. Have you ever stood in front of someone that proved you wrong so completely? You didn't even know where to start apologizing? Daniel did. He climbed up the ladder of the combine when she stopped to unload, waited until the grain finished pouring. Then he spoke. I was wrong, he said. Margaret looked at him, not surprised, not satisfied, just listening. I laughed, he continued, out loud, in front of people. I thought I understood what mattered. She nodded once. You understood what works, she said, not what lasts. He took that in, didn't argue, didn't defend himself. Just stood there on the side of a machine that was older than his entire career and let the truth settle. What do I do with that? He asked. Margaret shut down the engine. The sudden quiet made everything feel heavier. You remember it, she said, next time things go right. Because that was the part no one talked about. Good years hide weak ideas. Bad years expose them. And 1988 had exposed something that would follow Daniel Reeves long after Drought ended. He climbed down from the combine slowly, looked back at the field one more time, then at the road, then at the men who had once stood beside him, laughing. None of them met his eyes. Margaret restarted the machine, pulled forward. Another row, another pass, another quiet proof that something old hadn't just survived. It had outperformed everything that was supposed to replace it. And as the sun dropped low over Seward County, casting long shadows across a field that refused to fail, Daniel Reeves made a decision he never thought he would make. The next season, he wouldn't be selling the same seed. 5 years later, in the fall of 1993, Seward County looked like itself again. Rain had returned. Fields were full. Hybrid corn once again dominated the landscape, standing tall and uniform, exactly the way the brochures promised. Yields were strong. Markets had stabilized. The memory of 1988 had faded for most, but not for everyone. Margaret Halvorsen was 77 that year. She still walked her fields, still saved her seed, still planted rows that didn't look like anyone else's. Her yields weren't always the highest anymore, but they were never the lowest. And when weather turned uncertain, even for a season, people noticed. Daniel Reeves had changed too. Reeves AG Supplies still stood in Utica, Nebraska, but the catalog looked different. Alongside the hybrid giants were smaller listings, open-pollinated varieties, drought-resilient strains, seeds that didn't promise perfection, but offered something else. Options. He didn't advertise them loudly, didn't push them. But when a farmer asked, especially one who had seen a bad year before, Daniel would say, "Let me tell you about a field in 1988. And he would. Every time. Let me tell you about what happened to that seed. Margaret never sold it commercially, never branded it, never turned it into a business, but she shared it, quietly, one farmer at a time, a sack here, a handful there, always with instructions. Watch it, she'd say. Don't just plant it. By the early 1990s, small patches of her grandmother's corn began appearing across the county. Not everywhere, but enough. Enough that when dry spells came, and they always did sooner or later, there were fields that held on just a little longer than the rest. Margaret passed away in March of 1996. Peacefully, in her home, the farm went to her daughter, Ellen, who had moved back after years away. She didn't change much. Didn't need to. The corn was still there. The barn was still standing. And the old John Deere 6600? Still running. Same engine. Same sound, same steady rhythm through the rows. Daniel attended the funeral, stood in the back, didn't say much, but afterward, he drove out to the farm one more time, walked the edge of the field like he had years before. Only this time, there was no confusion in his eyes, just understanding, and something close to respect. He picked an ear of corn, turned it in his hands, smiled just slightly. Then he said it out loud, even though no one was there to hear it. You were right. And maybe that was the whole point. Not that she proved him wrong, but that she showed him something he didn't know how to see yet. Because progress isn't always about replacing what came before. Sometimes, it's about remembering what was never supposed to be forgotten. Some things aren't outdated. They're prepared. If you've ever known someone who held on to something everyone else dismissed, something old, something simple, something quiet that turned out to matter when it counted most, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. I read every story. And there's one coming soon about a farmer in western Kansas who kept a broken windmill standing for 20 years, until the day it became the only thing that could save his cattle. You'll want to be here for that.